I think we should be live now. Just checking. See if this is working. Let me know if you can see me, hear me, if I'm on your screen and speaking to you. It is 3 p.m. on Monday. It's Tuesday. Sorry. So I guess okay. I don't think anybody is actually here. So I'm just gonna start talking, and if you join us in the middle or something, then I will still be looking at the chat so I can come say hi to you. Yeah. Okay. I'm Shree. I'm your English educator for grades 11 and 12. Today we're going to be doing a grade 11 lesson, but before we get into that, I just want to let you know when we meet. We meet every day from 3 to 4 p.m. Except Sundays. Mondays, Wednesdays and Fridays are for grade 12 portions. We skipped grade 12 yesterday, but we'll be doing an extra session for that sometime this week. And Tuesdays, Thursdays and Saturdays are for grade 11. And because today is Tuesday, we will be doing grade 11. Okay. So today we're going to be doing this lesson called We're Not Afraid to Die, If We Can Be Together. That's a very intense title. It tells us quite a few things. It tells us that in this story there is the threat of death. The possibility of death is something that seems to exist in this story. Yet there isn't any kind of fear of this death, provided that we can be together. And as we read the story, we'll see who the we is, and we'll see how this togetherness sort of works against the fear of death, but also works against the actual death coming to be, how it prevents that possibility of death from happening, how it plays a role in stopping that death from happening. So that's something that we'll see. All of that said, this lesson is written by Gordon Cook and Alan East, and I'm going to tell you a very little bit about both of them. Gordon Cook is the narrator in this story and the author, but this is a first-person account that Gordon Cook has written, and it's a real-life account. It's something that's actually happened to Gordon Cook. And now, if you go look up Gordon Cook, you'll find that actually there's a sailor by the name of Gordon Cook who very recently was in the Olympics. But the Gordon Cook in this story is someone who's a lot older. He wasn't in the Olympics, but he was very, very interested in sailing and very, very invested in sailing, to the extent that at one point in time he did this 17-year journey, sea journey with his family around different parts of the world. Yeah, and so he's a different Gordon Cook, but he is very invested in sailing also, and that's the person whose story we're going to be reading today. In fact, one sec, just grabbing my little laser pointer. This is called Schooner to the Southern Oceans. A schooner is a sailboat. It's the Captain James Cook bicentenary voyage, 1776, 1976. This is the book that Gordon Cook wrote about all of those years of sailing that he did. It's not a very famous book, but it's the book from which this extract that we're going to read is taken. Now, who is Alan East in the middle of all of this? So he is somebody who does law, and he eventually went and became a professor. But another thing about Alan East is that he also went on to co-found this thing called the Central Academies Trust, which is very interested in education and in improving education. And it's unclear exactly how Alan East figures into this extract, like how he's involved and why he's put down as an author for it. But based on the fact that he was part of a Central Academies Trust, a good guess would be maybe that he picked up this particular segment from the larger book and he put it in a school textbook somewhere or something of the sort. So that's a likely explanation for why Alan East comes into the picture. There's actually very little information to be found on any of this out there, particularly Alan East. But you can find Gordon Cook if you want. He's won an award for what happens in this story, actually. So, you can look him up. Okay. As we get into the story, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be reading the story and we're going to be discussing it as we go. And before we start, I just want you to kind of take a moment and think about the ocean, because that's the setting of this text. And think about all of the feelings that rise up in you when you think of the ocean. What do you think of it? If you've ever been to the ocean, if you've been to the beach, if you've been to the sea, if you like the sea, if you don't like the sea, what are all of the things that you feel when you go to the sea? Just think about all of those things for like a couple of seconds. I'm just gonna wait for you to maybe think of it, and then I'll get into reading the lesson with you. Oh, hello, I've missed a lot of things in the chat. Hello to Kashish and Soumya and Sonia and Arti. And you have asked me to speak in Hindi. So I'm afraid I actually don't know Hindi. I mean, I understand it in the sense that if you were to type something out right now in Hindi, then I'd know what you're saying. But I can't speak it. I don't know how Hindi grammar works or many Hindi words, how to pronounce them and things like that. So I'm going to be doing the lessons in English. But you can always ask me to like stop and help you understand something if something's not clear. So please kind of just make use of chat to like do that. You can keep asking me questions and I will respond to you. Hello to Raman also. I hope that's how I'm supposed to say your name. Okay, Soumya, good to know that you understand. Okay, so because there are a couple of you here, let me actually ask you, what do you think about the ocean? Let me know. Okay, Aarti, thank you. Good evening to Ashutosh also. Okay. Well, you can let me know what you think about the ocean at any point of time. I will still be looking at the chat. But in the meantime, let's keep getting into the story, because this is a bit of a, not a very long story, but it's a bit of a story that will take us time. So, okay. In July 1976, my wife Mary, son Jonathan 6, daughter Suzanne 7, and I set sail from Plymouth, England, to duplicate the round-the-world voyage made 200 years earlier by Captain James Cook. So in the first line, we get the time. It's July 1976. We also get a sense of the we from the title. It's Mary, the wife of the narrator, Jonathan, the son of the narrator, who is 6 years old, Suzanne, who is the daughter of the narrator and who is 7 years old, and the narrator himself. And this entire group of people set sail from Plymouth, which is a place in England. And why do they set sail? They set sail because they want to duplicate the round-the-world voyage made 200 years earlier by Captain James Cook. So Captain James Cook is a person who basically is very well known for charting, which is to say mapping different parts of the world through the sea. He traveled via the ocean and he mapped multiple places around the world. And so these people set out, and their ambition is to repeat what he did, which is to say they also want to go around the entire world on the sea. And a voyage is a journey, and they want to follow Captain James Cook in this journey and do the same thing he did, essentially. For the longest time, Mary and I, a 37-year-old businessman, and now we know what the narrator is. The narrator is 37 years old and the narrator is a businessman, had dreamt of sailing in the wake of the famous explorer. And for the past 16 years, we had spent all our leisure time honing our seafaring skills in British waters. So, the narrator and his wife have actually been dreaming about sailing in the wake of the famous explorer. In the wake means following, sort of in the footsteps of the famous explorer. And because they've long dreamt of this, they've also done something that's sometimes unusual when it comes to people who have big dreams like this, right? They've pursued the dream by spending all the time that they have that they're not spending on, say, work. So all of their leisure time, all of their free time, they've spent it sharpening their sailing skills and their sea skills. And so they've gotten themselves a lot of practice. Our boat, Wave Walker, so boats are generally named, and the name of their boat is Wave Walker, which is a very pretty name. It's walking on the waves. A 23-meter, 30-ton wooden-hulled beauty. The size of the boat and the weight of the boat is given to us, 23 meters, 30 tons, wooden-hulled. The hull is the body of the boat. So I'm gonna try to draw for you maybe, and I hope you won't judge me terribly. So think about a boat like this, and that's a sail that I've drawn really terribly, but yeah, this segment that you see here, this segment is the hull, so that's the body of the boat, and it's made of wood here. And the narrator calls it a beauty, which immediately shows us also that the narrator cares about the boat and cares about sea things, because he appreciates it. There's a genuineness there. Had been professionally built, so it's a good boat. And we had spent months fitting it out and testing it in the roughest weather we could find. And not only have they spent months sort of preparing it completely, they've also tested it in weather that is bad to make sure that the boat will make it through bad weather. So all of this has been done, and we're gonna, so these are a couple of the phrases from the previous paragraph that I thought you might want to know the meanings of. I already explained them to you as we were talking, but in case you want to take a screenshot or something like that. seafaring is a word that, do you know what fare means? Okay, so fare means journey, and a seafare is a sea journey. So that's a good way of sort of understanding new words. You can break it down into two pieces and try to understand it. So yeah, so they've sharpened their sea journeying skills, and a couple of themes that we immediately get from this first paragraph, right? One is that lifelong ambition that we talked about, but two is a bunch of the characteristics of the narrator and Mary, Gordon and Mary. There's a perseverance in them, there's a determination, because they've spent 16 years of their free time practicing sailing for this journey that they're going to take. So you can see that they really have a drive, just to say a push to fulfill this ambition. So they're really working towards it, which, as I said, is very telling, because a lot of people don't always necessarily work towards big dreams like this. And we can see in this case that they are working towards it, and they've prepared themselves, they've prepared the boat, and they themselves are also skilled. They have knowledge about this, they have practice. So all of this is stuff that we should know going into the rest of the lesson. Another thing that we kind of get immediately from that first paragraph is the oddness of the style. Did you notice anything odd about the way that it was written? Okay, Aarti says yeah. So what about it was odd? Okay, well, one thing that's very odd about it is all of the details that we're getting, right? I'm going to take us back for a second. Look at this. Son Jonathan, 6. Daughter Suzanne, 7. That's 37-year-old businessman. That's info. That's very different from stories that we, for instance, we read Portrait of a Lady a little while ago. That was our first lesson. And in that, all of this information was not this obviously put out there, right? It was somewhere in the middle. We knew, for instance, that the narrator had known his grandmother for 20 years. So the narrator's age was probably 20. But these details aren't given to us in such blunt ways, especially details like 23 meters, 30 tons. So the style of this writing is very different from the usual kinds of writing that we've read so far, at least. This sort of directness, there's a wish to also give the reader all of this information, and so that immediately sort of tells us this is also some sort of account about something that's really happened, and the narrator's like put down the details of the account of this thing that happened somewhere, and now it's being recounted to us. So story, but also account, the story of something that happened. The first leg of our planned 3-year 105,000-kilometer journey passed pleasantly as we sailed down the west coast of Africa to Cape Town. Cape Town is at the tip of Africa. So this is the first leg of their 3-year journey. The first leg probably means it's maybe a year, maybe longer than that. It depends on them really and how they've split up the journey. But it's a very long-term commitment to this sea journey that they've made. It's a very long distance to cover also. And the first part of it, which is what they mean when they say first leg, goes well. They sail down the coast of Africa, they reach Cape Town, which is the tip of Africa, and there, before heading east, we took on 2 crewmen, American Larry Vigil and Swiss Herb Siegler. So at Cape Town, they stop and they pick up a couple of extra people. One is an American named Larry Vigil and one is a Swissman named Herb Siegler. And why do they pick up these 2 extra people? To help us tackle one of the world's roughest seas, the Southern Indian Ocean. So they take on 2 extra people because they think that they'll need 2 extra people on the ship in order to help them get through the Indian Ocean, the Southern Indian Ocean, which is very difficult to travel through because it's very unpredictable. When they say it's a rough sea, they mean that there are a lot of storms. You can't be sure how your journey on it is going to go. On our second day out of Cape Town, we began to encounter strong gales. So on their very second day having left Cape Town, they start to encounter very, very strong winds. For the next few weeks, they blew continuously. And these winds go on for weeks. Gales did not worry me, but the size of the waves was alarming. Up to 15 meters, as high as our main mast. So the narrator tells us, I'm not really worried about the winds, but the way the waves were starting to increase in size was starting to scare me. And how high were these waves? They were 15 meters high, which is an unimaginable sort of height for me, actually. But the narrator has a comparison point for it, which is the main mast of the boat that they're on. And the main mast is sort of the tallest pole in the boat on which they put their sails. So think about a boat in the sea and the waves being as high as like the tallest pole in that boat. Now that's really terrifying because the boat has to go on top of the wave and come back down, right? So that's the kind of imagery that we're getting here. Waves that are almost as big as the boat. And understandably, that's very terrifying. December 25th found us 3,500 kilometers east of Cape Town. So we also get a date for this. This is around December 25th. And they are quite a way past Cape Town where they stopped at. Despite atrocious, which is terrible, despite terrible weather, we had a wonderful holiday complete with a Christmas tree. So they seem to have picked up a Christmas tree somewhere, and they've even celebrated Christmas on December 25th. And the narrator even marks it for us, tells us, oh, December 25th happened, and it was quite nice. New Year's Day saw no improvement in the weather, but we reasoned that it had to change soon. We get a shift in time here. From December 25th, we've gone to Jan 1st. We moved into the next year, which was 1977, I think. Yeah. And the narrator tells us there's been no change in the weather for all of this time. It's not become better. But we're thinking that at some point or the other, it has to change. Now, they have actually like no reason to think this, right? They don't have any proof that the weather is going to change. They just think, oh, it's been so bad for so long. At some point, something's got to stop being this way and things will change. It's one of those sort of unreasonable things that you just think sometimes, oh, it's been terrible, and it'll change sometime. And it did change. And the narrator tells us, and as we thought that it had to change, it did change, except for the worse. So it doesn't become better. The implicit thing in this line, where they say, we saw no improvement in the weather, but we reasoned that it had to change soon, is they're thinking, okay, the weather hasn't gotten better, but at some point it'll get better. But it doesn't get better, it changes in the opposite direction, which is to say that it gets worse. This is the definitions again, if you want a screenshot. At dawn on January 2nd, the waves were gigantic. So it's the 2nd of January and the waves are immensely huge. We were sailing with only a small storm jib, and we're still making 8 knots. What is a storm jib? A jib is a triangular sail. A storm jib is a sail that's smaller than other sails. And why is it called a storm jib? It's because, so do you know how sailboats work? They put up the sail and the wind blows into them and it guides them, right? So generally you have very big sails to catch the wind. When there's a storm going on, you need to not catch as much wind because you don't want to get caught in the storm. You don't want to get thrown about by the storm and the force of the storm. So you end up taking on smaller sails, and that's why it's called a storm jib. And despite the fact that they were sailing with like a small sail, they're still making 8 knots. Knots is a unit of measurement on the sea. And 8 knots is a lot bigger. It's a lot more than an average sailboat generally sort of manages. Average sailboats I think generally do 4 to 6 knots. So it's far exceeded that too. So despite the fact that they're trying to go slow and they're going with this very small sail, they're still going really fast, more fast than they are expecting to. As the ship rose to the top of each wave, we could see endless, enormous seas rolling toward us, and the screaming of the wind and spray was painful to the ears. So the ship, this tiny boat is kind of, it's not very tiny, but this boat is rising to the top of the waves, and as they rise to the top of the waves, they see the sea stretching out in front of them. And the narrator says, we see endless, enormous seas rolling towards us. The thing is, they're seeing the waves rolling towards them, right? So this is a bit of a hyperbole, but we'll talk about it like in a brief bit. The narrator also says the wind is really loud, and the spray, which is the kind of water from the waves, that is also very loud, and it's so loud that the ears are hurting. To slow the boat down, we dropped the storm jib. So they want to slow the boat down even more because it's still going very fast, and so they drop the sail and lashed a heavy mooring rope in a loop across the stern. A mooring rope is a rope that you use to sort of stop the ship. You anchor the ship in one place using the mooring rope, but here they're just looping it around the boat. The stern is the back of the boat. When we think about the back of a vehicle, we think about like the back of a car, for instance, where you sit. But when it comes to a boat, the stern is actually generally where the wheel is. So it's actually like sort of the place that you travel from, the front in that sense. But it's actually physically the back of the boat. So they put a rope around that, and then they double lash everything, which is to say, they tie everything down twice because this is going to be a storm. There is a lot of wind, the sea is rolling really badly, so everything that's there on the ship has to be attached twice as strong as it usually is to make sure that nothing sort of falls off and nothing is swept away too easily. Went through our life raft drill. A life raft is a lifeboat, a raft is a boat. A drill is a routine or procedure, so it's kind of, they go through their lifeboat procedure, they kind of review the things that they need to do to use the lifeboat. It's practice just in case of an emergency. Attached lifelines. Lifelines are these wires, very, very strong wires. They're attached to the boat and they're attached to a person, so that if the person gets thrown off the boat, then they can manage to find their way back to the boat and people can pull them in from the sea. That's what a lifeline is. So they attach these lifelines. Then they donned oilskins. Oilskins are basically waterproof clothes. You wear it for rain, But here in this case, they're also wearing it in case the waves come over them, so that they'll have some sort of protection from that too. So waterproof from the rain and waterproof from the waves. And they put on life jackets, which I think you've probably heard about. You know, life jackets are like inflatable things. They keep you floating in the sea. And waited. So they do a big series of things, right? They drop the sails. They put the rope around the stern. Then they kind of tie everything down safer. And then they go through their lifeboat drill. They attach these lifelines. They put on oilskins. They put on life jackets. This is all of the steps that they're taking in order to safeguard themselves in case they encounter an emergency. So, long list, and at the end of the long list, there is nothing to do except wait. We'll talk about that in a second. These are all of the words that we encountered in the last paragraph. They are a lot of words. You can screenshot them if you like. Today we're really learning a lot about ships. Okay, but endless enormous seas rolling towards us. That's something that the narrator tells us, right? At the top of each wave, when I look out, I see these endless enormous seas rolling out towards us. They're not actually seas, they're the waves rolling out towards them. But the reason that he says seas is because the entire ocean is stretching out, first of all. So across, like in the horizon, the narrator can see the big broad oceans, the expansive endless ocean. But also it sort of tells us that the size of these waves that are rolling towards them are really big. So big that they could be called a sea in themselves, right? So that's a kind of hyperbole that's going on there. And we also saw the very extensive preparation, and we also got some really vivid descriptions. The sound of the sound of the wind, the sound of the spray, how it hurts their ears, the size of the sea, everything is set for us. And we ended on waiting. And there is a very different kind of horror that comes with waiting. You know, when you're in the middle of something really terrible, then that's a very different kind of pain. But when you're waiting and wondering if something terrible is going to happen, the sort of anticipation and the terror that comes with it, the uncertainty where you don't know if something bad's going to happen, you don't know what's going to happen, that kind of torture is kind of what's going on in that moment of waiting. And that has certain effect on the story, right? We start and things are not that bad. We start off on like a positive note. They're traveling here, they've gotten this far, and then things get a little worse, and then things get a little worse, and then things get dramatically worse, and we don't know what's going to happen. And that's sort of the story building up from like a low emotional point to a higher emotional point. So that's going on. I'm just going to check the chat in case you have any questions. Okay, I don't think you have questions. I think you're having fun talking to each other though. Okay, well, let me know if you have questions or if anything I'm saying isn't clear. Okay. The first indication of impending disaster came at about 6 p.m. Impending disaster mean soon to come disaster. So the first sign that disaster is going to arrives at 6 p.m. with an ominous silence. Ominous means foretelling that something bad is going to happen. It's inauspicious, sort of. And this silence is the first sign that something bad's going to happen. The wind dropped. and the sky immediately grew dark. So all of that sound that we've had until now in the previous paragraphs, where there's been a lot of volume to the wind, it drops, the sky becomes darker, and suddenly we have silence. And then came a growing roar, and an enormous cloud towered aft of the ship. And then there is a growing sound of a large noise. And this cloud seems to appear. The aft of the ship is the area near the stern of the ship, the back of the ship, actually the place where they used to steer the ship. So near that segment, there seems to be this really big cloud. With horror, I realized that it was not a cloud, but a wave like no other I had ever seen. The narrator looks at it, and the narrator thinks it's a cloud first. But then the narrator realizes this is not a cloud. This is a wave. And the narrator tells us it's a wave unlike any that the narrator has ever seen before. And this is frightening because the narrator has been sailing for a long time and has also sailed in pretty rough weather, as the narrator tells us in the very first paragraph. It appeared perfectly vertical and almost twice the height of the other waves, with a frightful breaking crest. So the wave seems to be vertical, almost straight. You know, a wave kind of like goes like this. It comes and it bends, but this wave is so tall that it seems to be going that high. So its kind of bend is, its curve is that high, and it seems very tall. Seems like a cloud, and it's twice the height of every other wave around them. And the crest is the top of the wave, so when it comes and it breaks, because that's how the sea goes, up and down, it's a very frightful crest. It's a very dramatic break. The roar increased to a thunder as the stern moved up the face of the wave. And for a moment, I thought we might ride over it. So the boat is moving up this wave. And as the boat moves up, the face of the wave is sort of the curve of the wave. So the boat is moving up the wave. And imagine the noise of that, right? The sea generally is really loud, but here they're in the middle of the ocean and this wave is really big, and they're going up that wave, and it sounds like thunder in their ears, except if thunder was around you instead of coming from the sky. So immensely loud. And yet the boat is moving up the wave, and the narrator hopes for a second that they might just make it over the top of the wave. But then a tremendous explosion shook the deck. But then an explosion shakes the deck, and we know what's happened. A torrent of green and white water broke over the ship. The wave breaks over the ship. A lot of water rushes in. My head smashed into the wheel, and I was aware of flying overboard and sinking below the waves. This water this big wave breaks into the ship. The narrator goes flying, smashes into the wheel, hurts his head, and then he flies off the boat and under the waves. I accepted my approaching death, and I was losing consciousness. I felt quite peaceful. The narrator says, I thought I was going to die, and I was slowly losing consciousness. I was slowly blacking out, and I felt peaceful. Interesting response to this moment, right? There's no panic, there's no freaking out, there's just acceptance and peace. And we'll come back to this also. I think actually we'll get into it right now. Some of the words that we discussed: torrent means huge, and a couple of themes from that paragraph, and we get these precise details again. At 6 p.m. this happened, and possibly the narrator had like a logbook or something when they were actually doing these travels, because otherwise we wouldn't get these kinds of exact details. And we get this sort of quiet before the storm. People keep saying that, it's the quiet before the storm, and it's become a phrase now that people use a lot to say, oh, before something immensely bad happens, there's some strip of peace. Except it actually comes quite literally from nature, in the sense that before the actual like storm breaks, it's actually like immensely quiet for a bit. So it's a phrase that's actually adopted from something that happens in the world. Those are two things that the paragraph tells us about. And the third thing is that sense of peace that the narrator has, and that sense of acceptance. And it doesn't seem to make sense, because the worst has happened, the worst that they've been worried will happen all this time has happened, and yet the narrator is not panicking. And in some sense, though it seems to be a very contradictory reaction, it's actually a reaction that makes a lot of sense. If you've been waiting for a long time for something terrible to happen, when something terrible happens, you actually feel a little relaxed, because at least there's no more doubt. There's no more uncertainty about what's going to happen. It's happened. So in that sense, there is peace. And for the narrator, who seems to be like dying, or thinks he is dying, which is quite literally after that there is nothing forward, right? It's sort of, okay, there's nothing I can do, so it's fine. And there's a sort of peace that comes from that, a sort of lack of worry that comes from that. That's the reaction that our narrator has. But unexpectedly, my head popped out of the water. So, 1 second we think the narrator is dying, and the next second the narrator's head comes back out of the water. A few meters away, Wave Walker was near capsizing, her masts almost horizontal. So the narrator's head comes out of the water, and he looks, and he can see his boat, and his boat is about to tip over completely upside down. Her masts are almost horizontal, so I'm gonna make a very bad drawing of like a boat for you again. Boat, and that sort of line in the center is what the mast is, right? And this mast is almost horizontal, which means that it's lying like this boat has gone like this. Sorry, there was some dramatic electricity tripping. One sec, I'm just gonna check if, yeah, everything is still running. And okay, yeah, everything's running. Sorry about that. Had my own little electrical, not storm related crisis here. But yeah, this boat is tipping, and then a wave hurled her upright, and the boat that's tipping gets hurled upright by the waves. And this is kind of mirrored, right? The narrator sinks and then comes back up, and then the boat almost sinks and comes back up. And my lifeline jerked taut. Taut means it gets yanked tight. So remember those lifelines they attach? They show up like to be really helpful in this moment. The narrator is attached to a lifeline. So in the water, that lifeline yanks, and using that he grabs the guardrails and he sails through the air into Wave Walker's main boom. So the narrator successfully gets back into the ship. The boom is a particular segment of the ship where it's not very important, so it's fine. But it's presumably where the lifeline is attached to, because that's where he gets yanked back to. Subsequent waves tossed me around the deck like a rag doll. So there are still waves that are crashing onto the top of the ship. The top of the ship is the deck. And we know this because even though the narrator gets onto the ship again, the narrator is still being thrown about. My left ribs cracked, my mouth filled with blood and broken teeth. Couple of injuries, presumably. It's inevitable because, I mean, it's a storm and the narrator has just been thrown off, thrown back in, and now he's being thrown around the ship. Somehow I found the wheel, lined up the stern for the next wave, and hung on. In the midst of all of this, and a lot is happening. The narrator's gone through so much, and yet the narrator finds the wheel. The narrator lines up the boat for the next wave so that the boat can go up the next wave, and then the narrator hangs on to the wheel. But the narrator is also hanging on to sort of determination. Hung on here is literal in the sense that the narrator is hanging on to the wheel and to the boat, but it's also a suggestion about the kind of emotions the narrator is experiencing, that kind of need to hang on in that moment to just get through this. So that also is there in hung on here. It's a lot of stuff that we've just talked about, but yeah, some words. And the boom is a pole for the sails. So in case you want to take a screenshot, and a couple of themes, and then I will pause to see if you have any questions again. So again, quite a dramatic shift from the previous paragraph. The narrator is in the sea, and then the narrator is on the boat, and everything seems to be on the worst of the worst, on the verge of the worst happening, but then somehow it's salvaged and there seems to be a little bit of hope again. And one more thing is that the narrator feels like he's being thrown about like a rag doll. Like rag doll is to say like a human being could throw about a rag doll, which is to say the narrator is basically like weightless in the hands of the waves. The waves are that powerful, and the narrator is incapable of doing anything against the waves. Like if you were throwing around a rag doll, the rag doll wouldn't be able to stop you. The narrator can't stop the waves. There's nothing the narrator can do. So that sort of helplessness comes in through this simile. Now I'm going to check if there are questions. Hello, Anurag. I just want to ask if everything that I've said so far has been mostly clear. Or if you have any questions. Thank you, Anurag. Salam Mahadevi, is that how I say your name? I hope everything's clear for you too. Please ask questions if something is not clear, and I can repeat it for you. But if there is nothing else, then I will keep going on. Sorry, I just need a little bit more water, which is very funny. Water everywhere. That's a reference to a poem, and we will talk about it in a moment. But the narrator tells us this, and the narrator means there is actually a lot of water on the boat. I could feel that the ship had water below, but I dared not abandon the wheel to investigate. So this again is an indication of how well the narrator knows ships and knows sailing, because just by being back on the boat, the narrator can sense that there is waterlogging happening in the boat somewhere. But the narrator can't leave because he has to guide the ship and the wheel. Suddenly, the front hatch was thrown open. The hatch is a door on the deck, and Mary appeared, and his wife appears. She throws open the hatch from the inside. So, actually, let me draw this for you in a bit. And Mary screams. She says, "We're sinking," she screamed. "The decks are smashed. We're full of water." So Mary says, "We're sinking. The top of the boat is smashed and the boat is filling with water." And the second that the boat is filling with water, it's going to go down, right? Instead of staying up and being afloat. Take the wheel, I shouted as I scrambled for the hatch. So now, because there's somebody else on the deck, the narrator passes the wheel to Mary, and then the narrator heads down. Larry and her, who were the other crew people that they picked up, were pumping like madmen. Pumping, here they're pumping the water out of the ship, trying to get all of that water out. Broken timbers hung at crazy angles. So all of the wood is broken and it's hanging around everywhere. The whole starboard side bulged inwards. The starboard side is the right side of the ship, and it's bulging because it's filling with water. Clothes, crockery, charts, tins and toys sloshed about in deep water. So the inside of the ship is filling with water so fast that all of the things that they have lying around in their rooms where they sleep is being washed out of the rooms and just floating around in water that is already quite deep. So all of these everyday things are sort of floating around in the water. Charts are maps for navigating. So a couple of things, and yeah. So let me actually try to draw a bit of the ship for you again now. So you have the ship, and you know this top segment, going back to my laser pointer, see this top segment, if you've seen like movies in which there are ships, they'll show you like a wooden like segment at the very top of the ship where people can look around at the sea and things like that. That's the deck. This is the very top, and underneath it are the rooms, the bunks, where they kind of have things that are necessary and also like places to sleep. So these are the segments into which the water is flooding, the right side, and that's because the top of those ships have kind of cracked because of the pressure of the waves. So that's what's going on, and I hope that gets you a little bit of an image of what it looks like. And water everywhere is how the narrator introduces the situation to us, right? And it's a quote from this poem called The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. I don't know if you've read it. I read it back when I was in school, I think it was in 10th grade or 9th grade. It's actually a story, it's a poem. It's about about a mariner, about a sailor. And the poem is about a sailor to whom something terrible happens, right, on the seas. And the situation that the mariner eventually ends up in is one where he says there is water everywhere, but not a drop to drink, which means he's on the seas and there's water everywhere that you can look, but they've run out of water to drink, and they can't drink the water of the seas. So despite there being so much of the thing that they need, they can't access it in the way that they need it. So that's what that line refers to, water everywhere. But here the narrator is kind of just using it to say there is a lot of water everywhere, and also to say this is disaster. So both of those meanings are kind of coming across here, and it's a reference to the other disaster on the sea, which is what happened to the ancient mariner from this poem. So that's what that reference is. Yes, Anurag, my home is actually close to the airport. I think you must have heard the airplane. I half swam, half crawled into the children's cabin. There's so much water that the narrator actually has to half swim and half crawl into the cabin. Are you all right? I asked. Yes, they answered from an upper bunk. But my head hurts a bit, said Sue, pointing to a big bump above her eyes. I had no time to worry about bumped heads. So the narrator gets into his children's cabin, which reminds us that there are children on this boat also, and he asks them if they're okay, so he's kind of checking in on them. And there on the upper bunk, which says again there is water on the floors, there's some flooding happening there. And the children say, yeah, we're okay. And then Sue, the girl, she says, my head hurts a little bit and there's like a bump above her eye. And the narrator says, I had no time to worry about bumped heads. So he's saying, okay, she's gotten a little injured, but that's not something I can think about right now. After finding a hammer, screws, and canvas, I struggled back on deck. So the narrator finds a bunch of tools and gets back onto the top of the ship. With the starboard side bashed open, we were taking water with each wave that broke over us. So the top of the ship, the right side is broken, and with each wave that comes over them, the water is going in. If I couldn't make some repairs, we would surely sink. And if the narrator can't do some sort of work to try to stop these waves from going in, the boat is going to sink. Somehow I managed to stretch canvas and secure waterproof hatch covers over the gaping holes. Some water continued to stream below, but most of it was now being deflected over the side. And the narrator uses his tools. He kind of has like big spreads of canvases, like cloth, we can think of this. And he stretches it over the holes in the starboard side of the ship, and he uses the hammer and screws to kind of put it in place. And so these holes at the top of the ship are now covered, and because of that, when the waves come on top of the ship, they go off back into the ocean rather than going down below into the below deck. So that risk of sinking is now less again. So as we saw, the narrator checks in on his family, and by the end of this paragraph, things sort of seem better, and in between we get a little interaction between the narrator and his children, and the narrator says, I had no time to worry about bumped heads. Just to say, this is a very small injury, this isn't something I can pay attention to, I have bigger concerns to think about right now. He's not being cruel in that moment, right? It's just a question of necessity. He really can't think about other things right now. He has to just focus on making sure that the entire boat is fixed and that they will get through this crisis together. So this injury seems very minimal to him because of the sort of context around it. So actually, I'm wondering if this is a pretty good moment to stop, because we still have a lot to go through. Class is almost over, and I think you have another class at 4, which is biology. So I will probably have to stop, but I will see about getting another class fixed up so that we can finish the rest of this lesson maybe tomorrow or the day after. I hope that's okay. But Anurag, you are asking me what goodness gracious means. So it really depends on context. Goodness gracious can mean a lot of things. It's sort of it's a phrase like, oh my god, you know. So sometimes we say it happily, sometimes we say it like in shock or some sort of, oh, how could that happen? So sometimes people say goodness gracious to say, oh my god. So that's the kind of meaning that goodness gracious comes with. I hope that's a little bit clear. Hello Aishi. We're just finishing class. I think we will need to come back and finish the rest of this lesson. I didn't expect this to take so long, but it took some time. So we will set up another lesson to finish off the rest of this. Okay, I will see you all soon. Bye. And thanks for being here. Actually, while you're here, I also should tell you something else. Wait a minute. I'm gonna discard those little annotations. Still have a bunch of slides to get through, but I want to let you know that, oh my god, okay, I'll just have to go through them. So many more slides to get through. Yeah, I want to let you know about the Unacademy app. You can download it and you can try a lot of features for free on it. There are live quizzes and mock tests and study material that's going to get put up. So you can sign up for the app and try those things out. That's THAR01 is my code if you want to use it. You can also ask doubts on there. So if, for instance, you're wondering even something like what does goodness gracious mean, you can basically sort of put up the question and you can choose the subject the question falls under, and somebody will respond to you. So that's the app. You can just click on the Ask a Doubt section and get that done. And there's something called Unacademy Plus, a bunch of subscription features that you get if you join Unacademy Plus. Access to a lot more courses, a lot more lessons, a lot more guidance, a lot more practice tests, and batch courses where basically we'll be doing portions in different sorts of segments and different sorts of matchups. These are the pricings for Unacademy Plus, and the price is lower per month if you take it for a longer duration of time, which is something you should notice. Another thing is Unacademy Iconic, where you get more individualized sort of help. You get like one particular person that you end up working with. You get one-on-one guidance from educators, and you get access to these live doubt solving sessions where you get to meet the educators and ask them about your doubts, and have sessions like to purely talk about doubts, and you get reports on how you're doing. Your parents can kind of talk to educators. So that's Iconic, and these are the prices for Iconic. And again, per month costs kind of go down if based on how long you take it for, and the longer you take it for, sort of 18 months is like, that's like a good price per month. So those are a bunch of things. And one last thing that I think I don't have a slide for, but there is a link in the description box for a Telegram group for 11th and 12th, and if you join it, you'll basically get updates on when classes are happening and what classes are happening when. So you should join it if you want to keep track of all of these things without sort of having to keep an eye on YouTube. All of that said, sorry, my throat is really dying. But if you like today's lesson, then please leave a like, leave comments if you have any questions, and do subscribe if you're looking for more content of this kind. And I will see you again very soon with the second half of